Hello, everyone. Here we are again, another episode of Love, Laughs, and Lessons. And we have a fantastic guest that is joining us today. And just for those of you who are not familiar, I'm Dr. Frankie, and I am co-host with Denise Rai, and I'm going to hand it over to her right now.
Yes, so welcome back. Hello, hello. We are ready to dive into real dynamics, real relationships, far beyond the TikTok quips. I'm not bashing TikToks, I love it. But today we're going to have Bev Mitelman with us, a certified attachment practitioner who brings a unique depth of understanding to the table. Bev's insights into relationships is not only academic, but also deeply personal. Growing up in a chaotic environment taught her the profound effects of insecure attachments. And it fueled her passion for helping others transform their relationships. She's the founder of Securely Loved, where she turns the chaos of not knowing your attachment styles and insecure attachments and all of those under that category into the harmony of secure connections. Her work is all about making real, substantial changes by tackling the subconscious patterns that often guide our behaviors. So we're going to dive deep today with Bev. We're going to explore how we can all achieve more secure and enriching relationships. So I'm ready. Let's get this conversation going.
Welcome, Bev.
That's so great. Thank you. Thank you for the beautiful introduction. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yay, yay.
So,
let's
go for it.
Go ahead, Frankie. No, go for it.
You are doing such important work. Because today it feels like, as a clinical psychologist, I can tell you I am watching people really flounder and struggle in terms of their ability to connect and become attached. And we feel like we know so much about these theories now with TikTok. We're just talking before we went live about TikTok. And it's just, there's all of these like armchair therapists and people that are throwing around terms and think they really understand the ins and outs of all of this. And it's confusing us. So so thanks for doing what you do. And tell us, just jump in wherever.
That's so great. Thank you. So, we'll talk, basically about attachment, right? So, as we all know, attachment is an emotional bond. And generally, people have an idea that the way that we move through life has to do with our early years. But I think we're just starting to understand really how important those early years are. So, when we come into the world, fresh as a baby, the earliest interactions that we have with our caregivers, and mother, father, aunt, grandmother, it doesn't matter, but our primary caregiver, that sets a pattern in our minds for essentially how we're going to give and receive love throughout our life. And so there's some really, really interesting things that happen in those earliest years, like before 5 years old, let's say. So if you're cared for by, let's say, a mother, and she is quite emotionally attuned to you. So you cry, she picks you up, she uses a lot of facial expressions. She's teaching you how to regulate. She's teaching you what the different emotions are. When you cry, she gives you space to communicate what that is. That individual grows up feeling very safe and trusting of themselves and of other people. And they learn that life is all about connection, which is a beautiful thing. So we estimate, and people like to go back and forth on the estimates, but so far the estimate is about half of our population in North America have a secure attachment. And then the other half have what we call an insecure attachment. And these are folks who are coming out of homes where there wasn't that consistent emotional attunement from the caregiver. So there could have been, for example, abandonment or perceived abandonment, neglect. There could have been abuse, all kinds of abuse. A child could have been put in a very difficult, chaotic environment, like a really messy, litigious divorce. There's all sorts of scenarios, right? And these individuals grow up with, again, what's called an insecure attachment. And the skills that they learn in childhood is not connection, it's survival, which you could imagine when you grow up, you have a completely different lens of the world when you go to interrelate with other people. One person is, knows connection and the other person knows survival. And so there's a whole set of thoughts, emotional patterns, personality needs, communication styles, relationship to boundaries, and then also coping behaviors that come out of these attachment styles. So I do want to say before we get any further, attachment styles is not a mental illness. It's not diagnosed. It's learned behavior, right? So we learned this stuff really young. Um, and also it's a continuum, right? We very rarely, as I'm sure you both know, fit into any one box nicely and neatly. So it's a continuum. So even on the insecure attachment spectrum, there is one side of the extreme that would be called the anxious preoccupied. And then whooped, on the other side of the extreme is the dismissive avoidant. And somewhere in the middle is the fearful avoidant with traits of both the anxious and the dismissive. And so yeah, it's important to keep in mind that we generally have traits where we're leaning in one way or another. And this is very, very telling, almost entirely predictable for how you will function within your relationships and particularly your romantic relationship.
What I really love about it, which always gives me hope for people, and is that it can change for you depending on,
Yeah,
right, you are in relationship with. So that's really a beautiful thing because you don't feel like, oh, well, this is a fruitless mission. I'm
That's right.
screwed. I have an anxious attachment style or an avoidant attachment style, and I'm stuck with this forever. And it's actually not the case.
Yeah.
yeah, not at all, actually. So you will know this very clearly that we are most suggestible when we're, our youngest selves, right? And so that's why we adopt a lot of these patterns when we're really young. But of course, the experiences that we have throughout our life can shift our thinking and our perception. So if we started off with a secure base, but then we dated someone who was dismissive avoidant or someone who was abusive towards us, that could, of course, impact your perception and your emotional patterns and so forth. So, just like that is true, the reverse is true too,
Mhm.
meaning that these are the learned behaviors which we can unlearn, right? We can, in the same way that we pattern these behaviors early on, we can repattern new behaviors. And so, what's so interesting is I always tell my clients is that this is not a life sentence. Like, just because you're on a dismissive end and the way that you deal with things is you shut down and you stonewall, for example, that's your coping mechanism. You learned how to do that when you were young. You could recognize at this point in time as an adult with critical thought, this is no longer serving me. I want to learn another better way. And you can, right? So, and what we do is that we don't start with the tell me what happened in your childhood. I actually generally start with tell me something that happened last week or the month before, even yesterday, in the close present that got you really upset, that really riled you up, that carried a really strong emotional charge. And people will say, like an easy example will be, I don't know, I was stuck in traffic yesterday and someone cut me off and I flipped them the bird. And I hear this stuff often. And so we go, okay, so what were you thinking in the moment? And we trace it back to the thought pattern, the emotional pattern, and the core wound. And the core wound is what they're carrying from the present that's affecting their behavior today. So in this particular case, you're flipping strangers the bird. It could be because they just at their core they feel disrespected. So whenever they sense that someone is disrespecting them, they have a strong emotional reaction because it's touching on a wound that's unhealed. It's there,
Mhm.
right? Whereas if someone cuts me off in traffic, I don't get bothered by that. I get bothered by other things, but not by
But
that,
not that. Yeah, you're
right?
flipping off the bird for other things, but not the traffic cop.
Right. Yeah, because like again, you're generally going to respond the strongest to the wounds that you're carrying that are unhealed.
Mhm, mhm.
So then what happens next for that person? Where do you then go back to at any point? the childhood and to bring that up, even though you're starting with, the current, where this agitation is coming from, then what happens next for them?
It often goes into the childhood. It just
Okay.
does, right?
Yeah.
So, and because what we're trying to do is figure out where the core wound is coming from. But as you know, also, memory is such an interesting thing, because it's not reliable for humans. We just know that memory is not reliable. So, um, there's a particular category of folks, the dismissive avoidants, who are typically very good at repressing memory and repressing, although we're all good at that, but repressing their emotions. Uh, if I say to them, what type of childhood did you have? 9 out of 10 times they'll tell me I had a great childhood. Okay, but someone confronts you to have a difficult conversation, and it makes you so anxious that you just shut down and walk away. So where does that come from?
Mm. Mhm.
Right? And they'll go, I don't know. I just simply remember my parents being very loving. Okay, let's talk about how did they show love, right? And you realize that what they're describing is they weren't abused, thankfully. They didn't perceive to be neglected, but they didn't get emotional attunement,
Mm.
right? Some people think, okay, well, I got 3 meals a day, I went in a safe home, but they weren't emotionally attuned. So the behavior of being able to emotionally regulate and connect with someone was never modeled for them. And so when something gets too overwhelming, they shut down and they walk away. So these are survival techniques,
Yes.
right? So one of the things that we do is, again, we look at the situations that are causing discomfort in today's world. And typically, we very quickly can trace back one or two core wounds that are showing up the strongest. So in the case that I used earlier, we identify that if you have a strong I am disrespected core wound. We'll work on that.
Mhm.
And what we'll do is we will work with our clients to identify key pieces of evidence to actually oppose what that limiting belief is. I am or I will be disrespected, right? So
Mhm.
if you go through the world believing you're going to be disrespected, you will be right. You will
Yeah,
find evidence
that's right.
that
That's
you
right.
will be disrespected, right?
The
Mhm.
Right?
That's right.
self-fulfilling prophecy, right?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
manifest it, create it.
Yeah, beautifully said. So what we have to do is we have to change the pattern there. But that pattern lives in the subconscious mind. I mean, I know both of you know that the conscious mind really only, you know, is only in charge of a fraction of our thoughts and our behavior. I think 5%, something
5%.
like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
The subconscious mind is really running the show, right? So we have to talk to the subconscious mind to repattern this limiting belief, I will be disrespected, into I am respected.
That's
So
right.
I work with clients to find, let's say, 8 to 10 pieces of evidence to oppose that limiting belief. And then what we do is we use it as a tool for 3 to 4 weeks. We either make a recording of it, or some people like to read out a list. I prefer a recording. And what we do is we ask our clients to listen to this morning and night. And I know you're going to know why we say morning and night, because you're more suggestible, right?
Yeah.
So when you
Yeah.
first thing when you wake up in the morning, and you're like in that trance state, you don't know what day of the week it is. That's the time that you want to try and put new ideas into your mind because you're most suggestible. Same with at night.
Yeah.
And that what we do find is that those patterns do take hold after a period of time. Because repetition is key in talking to the subconscious mind. Imagery, emotion, and repetition. So that's the way your mind was programmed in the first place. So if we keep talking about the I will be disrespected, you would have heard, seen, felt over repetitively,
That's right.
probably attached to a very negative charge, the
Mhm.
feeling of disrespect.
So you do this for 4 weeks. Is that because with neuroplasticity, is that how long it takes for a new neuronal pathway to
Yeah.
establish?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So after three, I mean, they say 21 days. I say 3 to 4 weeks. We kind of see how it goes. And then most people have more than one core wound. So then we move on to the next. But yeah, that's precisely why, Dr. Frankie. Yeah.
Yeah. And it sounds like is this cognitive behavioral therapy? Is that the intervention?
It's a mix of a number of things. So I studied with Thais Gibson, and she put together, I would say, like a number of different modalities connected to attachment styles. So we also do, for example, some of the other exercises. We work with our clients so that they can identify their needs. We work with our clients to help them identify where they're having issues with boundaries. We work with our clients to also identify their communication style and how that's working vis-a-vis the people in their life, especially their romantic partner. And then also, of course, their coping behaviors, right? So what's so interesting again is that there's very, very distinct patterns for people who fall into these, we'll say, groupings. I always try to avoid the word boxes or categories, groupings.
Groupings,
Um,
yeah.
so generally, there's a pattern of behavior of someone, for example, who's really strongly leaning, anxious, preoccupied, right? So that's the individual who would have experienced in childhood abandonment or perceived abandonment, right? So a child at a young age might have perceived that they were being abandoned by their mother. For example, if the mother was going to work and they were dropped off at the grandma's house during the day. Clearly, the child's not being neglected, but in a child's mind, why do I keep getting dropped off? So that's what we say perceived abandonment, right? But these
Mhm.
are the folks that grow into adulthood needing a lot of reassurance, a lot of validation. They generally feel lonely. They're kind of sad. They're the ones that when a romantic partner comes into their life, they move at lightning speed. They want to lock it down. It's like for them, their core wound is I will be abandoned. So it's like they're the ones, yeah, yeah, they pounce. And they're the ones, unfortunately, I'm not a fan of this, but on the internet, oftentimes we give these, I think, mean labels, but they're the ones that are often called needy.
I
I
hate that.
think I hate it because it's just we all have needs. Like
Absolutely.
every human has needs. And this particular group of people might be more communicative about their needs, and they
Mhm.
might be they are generally quite expressive, and they might be a little more intense because for them, they have that abandonment,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
But so, it's very easy to see once you start diving into this that the relationship to boundaries for this individual, for example, they really struggle with it. Like they don't know how to say no to people. They
Mhm.
say yes to everyone. One of the common core wounds that an anxious, preoccupied person has is I will be excluded. And so that is their lens. So if they're planning a birthday dinner, they invite everyone because from their perspective, I don't want to upset Rebecca over here because I don't want her to feel excluded,
Excluded.
right?
That's
That's their
right.
lens. So
That's so
interesting.
interesting.
So
It
they're
is
really
so
empathic,
interesting.
right? They can relate to that feeling. So that's their way. They put themselves in their shoes, this person's shoes. So they are inviting everybody because they themselves would feel excluded.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So do
Right.
people have a certain with a certain attachment style? Do they gravitate towards a certain attachment style in a partner?
That's such a good question. Yeah. So, the old saying opposites attract is a funny one. It's somewhat true, but if we look at the spectrum, the anxious and then the dismissive, luck will have it that they often find each other, which is generally very explosive in the beginning because
Mhm.
the anxious preoccupied is very communicative generally. They're very likable, they're expressive, they're open, which is all the traits and qualities that the dismissive avoidant is not. The
Right.
dismissive avoidant is a lot more reserved. They can be very charming, but they value their freedom and independence. They are very cerebral. So they're very logical and rational as opposed to emotional. So these types of personality traits are very different. They tend to very often attract each other magnetically, but don't work out. So oftentimes we see this charge where they come together and the first couple of weeks is explosive and it's really enjoyable. But the traits that they find so interesting about each other is essentially once there's an emotional bond that forms, that's what tends to tear them apart.
That's
So
right.
we have to understand that attachment styles, your style, which means like your behaviors and any fears that you're carrying, they only come online once a bond is formed.
Mhm.
So if you're dating someone, date 1, 2, 3, 4, you're not going to see this stuff. It's
Right.
going to come later down the road,
Mhm.
right? So,
Once you are attached, right?
yeah, right? I
Exactly.
know. Thank you. That's exactly right. Once you're attached. Yeah.
So my understanding of it is that an anxious person and an avoidant person, they can be in relationship with each other as long as they're informed and educated about their attachment style and motivated to actually work together to sort of mimic or to shift to more of a secure attachment style. So it's got to be an active effort on both parts, and
Yeah.
with empathy and understanding and patience and support and all of that. And it's hard, right? We want things to be easy and immediate, right? And like this instant gratification. And that's the kind of thing where it's like, this is gonna, all right, here we are. Let's put our gloves on. We're gonna
Gotta
Yeah.
work
do
this
the
out.
work to make this work because there's so much good here. But it's worth it.
Yeah. It definitely is. So I believe that any relationship, right, regardless of attachment style, can work if the two people are committed to making it work, right? So you
Mhm.
have to find the dynamic that is somewhat comfortable for both. So, the thing that we talk about so often is conflict. So when there's conflict, these two individuals, which by the way, if I can mention, we often use gender to describe attachment styles. It is not gender specific. So women can be dismissive, men can be anxious, preoccupied. It's the internet tends to describe, a man as dismissive and a woman as anxious, and it's just
Not
not
true.
true. It's not by gender,
Mhm.
right? So I just wanted to put that out there. But in conflict, these two folks will behave very differently, right? So what we're talking about is when you have an insecure attachment, and you haven't done the work, you have, an emotionally dysregulated nervous system. Okay,
Mhm.
which means that you're hovering, your baseline is generally much more elevated on edge than someone who is more secure, someone who knows how to regulate their own emotions. And again, if this is not to shame anyone or blame, but these folks came out of homes where they didn't learn this skill, and it's a skill. Emotional regulation is a skill. They didn't learn, it wasn't modeled for them. And so you have the anxious person and then you have the dismissive person. And in the face of conflict, both of them want to emotionally regulate, which is
Mhm.
normal, but they're going to do it in distinctly different ways. So this one is going to pull away, take space,
Right.
probably stonewall. They need to isolate themselves in order to calm down and to think. Um, they really, really detest dismissive avoidance. They detest conflict. They have this ideal that relationships should be easy. And so now we have the anxious, preoccupied person who wants to close the gap of proximity to their loved one. They need the closeness. They
Yes.
need to talk it out. They're the person that says, we need to talk about it before we go to sleep. I can't go to sleep angry. And this person's like, just let me go to sleep. And we talk
And then
about
you
it.
should go to sleep. Good night. They just start snoring, and you're lying there like, oh my gosh, I gotta lie with
I
this
need to tell you
all
this. I need to tell you this. I need to tell you this.
You know,
But I need to tell you this. But I need to tell you this.
I mean, listen, and I've seen the craziest of
Yeah,
behaviors, right? Like I use crazy in a very very respectful, fun way. I
yes.
don't ever use that as a judgment, but I've seen people like if their partner was sleeping, draft long text messages or emails and send it to their partner. So it's the first thing they see when they get up, right? Like for them, they have to emote. They cannot self-regulate and go, okay, I'll speak with my partner tomorrow. Like they just can't do that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So yeah, there's
Well, I don't know. I'm having a reaction just right now. I've been hearing that. I'm like, I would feel abandoned. Like, and I have an avoidant style, but I've worked on for many, many years, and I would feel abandoned. So there's a part of maybe a little bit of an anxious attachment part of me that's like, I need to resolve this because otherwise I don't want to sit here feeling like I've been abandoned.
well, it's a beautiful point. I'm taking notes as we're talking because I do want to talk about the fearful avoidance
Yeah.
uh, in a moment, but I just wanted to sort of close the loop on this whole conflict thing because, you know, if a couple really wants to make it work, they can absolutely come up with scenarios that would work. And one of the scenarios that I absolutely love is if you're deep in a conflict and the dismissive avoidant needs some time to think about it and to regulate, the anxious person really needs that closeness. You can, for example, choose to, let's say, agree to cuddle quietly on the couch so that you're in proximity
That's
and
right.
revisit the discussion tomorrow night after 8.
Yeah.
So that way you don't feel abandoned. You're still close to your partner, you're cuddling them, but the dismissive avoidant doesn't feel up against the wall like, I got to talk about it now. I have a day to relax and think about what it is I want to say. And because their feelings are also really repressed. So oftentimes they need a little time to process. How am I feeling, right? Where do I want to take this conversation? So there are absolutely ways that people can work on these things, but without understanding your own patterns in your own minds, and without understanding what could work between the two of you, you will continue to come across these really frustrating moments.
Hmm.
So at that point in time, if you realize that you're just really like bumping heads with your partner, this is definitely something to look at.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I wanted to talk to you about and I took a note here about the fearful avoidant, because you talked about how you're dismissive, but you're also feeling abandoned, which is a beautiful segue. So I don't think I explained this well enough in the beginning. There is a fourth category still on the insecure attachment. So we have secure and insecure. And on the insecure spectrum, we have anxious, preoccupied, dismissive, and fearful avoidant in the middle. And this is the rarest kind. It's estimated like 7 to 10% of the population. Okay? This is the partner that is often referred to as the hot and cold partner. So this is the partner who very likely came out of a home where there was abuse, any kind of abuse, or the environment was extremely chaotic. So this partner, the fearful avoidant, deeply craves intimacy and is also absolutely afraid of it at the same time. So
Hmm.
they often go towards someone, that person comes close to them, they start to feel afraid, they pull back. Then a couple of
Yeah.
days later, when that fear diminishes, hey, where's that person? I missed them. They come towards them. Yeah, and it's a dance. Now, the root of this, and I was a fearful avoidant my entire life until I found this work, and I'm grateful for it because it changed everything for me. But I was deeply, you know, deeply, I guess, enamored with my father. I thought that he brought out the sun in the morning, right? Like I thought he was just the most amazing person, and his love and attention, which was hard to get, meant the world to me. At the same time, he was abusive. So if something would happen to me at school, this is a person I would run to and I would want to tell and talk to. And because I was seeking comfort from this person that I loved so much as a young child, they were my comfort. They were also the person that was abusing me. So you can see how that would create a disorganized pattern in someone's mind for how love is given and received, right? I really want to be close to you, but you scare me, so I'm going to take 2 steps back. I'll take 1 step forward. And so there's a whole set of patterns that develop around this too. So one of my I call it my skills is I'm quite hyper vigilant. I can, and some people say that this is, they'll call it a trait. I phrase it as a skill because for me it's helped me through my life, but I can walk into a room and scan the room real quickly and feel and read people's temperaments, their affect. And this is a survival strategy. In my mind, I'm assessing the risk. Am I safe? Am I safe? Is this person okay? Can I talk to that person? You learn this in childhood.
Yeah, that makes so
Yeah.
much sense. Yeah, who can
Doesn't
I
it?
trust? Who's going to explode? I can see it. Yeah,
I
absolutely.
call them my
Yeah.
antennas.
You're in.
Yeah. Yeah. So do both of you also consider yourselves to be really hyper vigilant, or is this something that you also experienced?
Me for sure. I grew up in a very traumatic environment. So yeah, with mentally ill mom and dad too, both. Yeah, kind of
So,
abandoned growing up
yeah.
in New York City on
So
my
my
own.
mom was the peacekeeper, but my dad was pretty explosive and not directly towards us, but we would see him explode, right?
And as
So
a child, did that
as
scare you?
um scared, I avoided him at all costs. So yeah, I guess I didn't, I was always on the outskirts, just kind of peeking. That was far enough. As long
Yeah.
as apart, but distant.
Yeah.
Yeah, y'all are having a great time in the living room, and I'm down the hallway. I'm enjoying it, and I'm hearing the music, and and I'm watching, but I'm not coming over there. Yeah,
You're going to stay at a safe
I'm going to
distance.
stay in a safe space.
Now,
Yeah.
now, Denise, let me ask you, and we'll come back to you, Dr. Frankie, because I think it's fascinating what you said. Your behavior today, when you walk into, let's say, a party, how do you behave today?
Um, I scan the room. I scan everything. I scan the room, but
Okay.
I'm going to still show up. But I'm
Yeah.
also like very observant of who's around me and what's
Yes.
going on and that feeling and that energy.
Are you
Yeah.
standing in the middle of the room with everyone around you, or are you sort of towards the back of the room with your back on the wall where you can see everyone?
So I'm probably going to come in and then go to a corner so I can even see who's coming in the door.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So, so we talk about how these patterns. You see, so you're going to a party that has nothing to do with your family, right? Like you were once acting that way as a young child in your family household. You're now going to a party that
Mhm.
your family's not there. It's like, let's say, a group of friends, and you're still acting the same way.
That's right.
You're like,
That's,
I'm gonna enjoy the party from this safe space here in the corner over here. I can hear the music. I'm good. I'm enjoying.
that's right.
But you take a safe distance.
But I'll tell you the other thing that I do, and I haven't done it in a while, but I have done this before. I'll slip out of that party too.
Oh
I
yeah.
won't tell anyone that I'm leaving. I used to be like, I'm going to the bathroom and I'm in the cab.
So, it's so great that we can laugh at our behaviors
Yeah, for
because I
sure.
mean, listen, some of our behaviors as humans are quite funny, but I know, and I know the two of you know that that behavior was spawned by fear.
Yeah.
So what were you afraid of? What were you uncomfortable? What was triggering you in that moment that you had to run,
Yeah. Yeah. That's
right?
great.
Because that's a trauma response,
That's
right? You
it.
have the
Yeah.
fight or the flight.
Mm-hmm.
You know this, and then you have the fawn, which is, the favorite tactic of the anxious preoccupied, the people pleasing, you know, please don't leave me, I'll do anything, it's all don't leave me. And fawning is a huge tactic that's used there. And then the freeze, like the functional freeze. So it's great that you can recognize that in certain situations you had this uncontrollable urge to flee,
Got to get out of here before something happens. That was always my before it happens, because it's coming. Don't know when, but I'm gonna, okay, it's, yeah, lots of people now. All right, time for that bathroom break.
Yeah.
Well, here's where we got to ask ourselves, right? It's like,
Yeah.
this worked really well for us in the past, but is it working now?
Is it working now? That's right, for sure.
Yeah, that's exactly the question. Yeah, that's right.
Mhm.
I wanted to, if it's okay with you, can we talk a little bit more about your childhood? Or you prefer not?
No, I'm
Because
fine.
well, I was actually asking
Frankie,
Dr.
Dr. Frankie.
Frankie.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, sure.
It's, yeah,
It's
I
like,
mean,
oh,
so have you looked into attachment styles before? Like, have you?
Oh, for
Because
sure. Well, I'm a
you
psychologist,
have.
so yeah. And I've looked at it initially in grad school using myself. When all of a sudden you're in class and professors are talking about all type of diagnoses, and you're thinking, who in my family has this and who has that? So when attachment theory came up, I was like, oh wow, that sounds a lot like me. I'm super avoidant. And back
Yeah,
then, 20 something years ago, it was like it was simplified. It wasn't, they didn't have all of that. Now it's much more, right? With like, there's so many, it's more complex, we're more complex as humans. It was more like, it was
mhm.
very simple. It was like anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, secure. I think there were like three. And now
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
a
more
little
layered,
more complicated.
more
yeah.
Yeah.
complicated. Yeah. Which is
So
what you're picking up on, probably, that I'm a combination. Yeah.
yeah, because you described yourself as dismissive, but you also said in the example that I used that you're feeling abandoned, which is not something who's dismissive would say. So I'm like, okay, so there's traits on both sides.
Yeah.
And what's so interesting about the fearful avoidance is they can waffle back and forth depending on who they're in relationship with. So this is most prevalent in romantic relationships. So my last partner was dismissive avoidant. And so I noticed myself, even though I'm fearful avoidant, that I started to lean more anxious.
Yes. Totally.
Yeah, and then when people, if I'm even friends of mine who are very, who are strong leaning on the anxious, preoccupied, I tend to be more dismissive.
Mm-hmm.
So it's my way of regulating, my nervous system.
Yeah, I
So
mean, that is I don't know how you feel about it, but it feels like too much to me. Somebody who's very anxious and they're like clawing at me, I'm like, oh my God, I can't breathe. You know?
that's exactly it. And I've learned that I've learned that communication does help with this, right? So I have one particular friend who, if I left her to her devices, she would want to talk 4 times a day. And I'm happy talking once a month. It's,
Yeah.
how are the kids? Everything's good. Great.
Hi.
But
Yeah.
yeah, the minute she gets into her car, she wants to talk on the way to work and then the way home from
Oh my
work. And
goodness.
and right, it's
Can't
too
do that.
Giving
much.
me
Yeah.
anxiety, the thought of it.
Right. And I know. And I've actually sat down with her and I've said, listen, I adore you, but I simply don't talk to anyone this much. And so we're going to have to figure it out. If you really want to call me on your way to work, maybe it's just Tuesday mornings because I can't do it 5 days a week.
Yeah.
And it ended up being a conversation where we laughed at each other because we're so distinctly different.
Mhm.
And I was like, I'm not abandoning you, but right now you're suffocating me. So we have to find the space.
Yeah.
And that open and sort of comical conversation was helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's hard
Yeah.
because I think people can be sensitive about that, and sometimes they haven't done their work. Many times, right? They haven't done their work.
Many times.
They
Yeah.
feel exposed in some way, and it's just, that's not an easy conversation to have oftentimes,
Mhm.
but it's an
Mhm.
important one. That if the relationship is important to us, we need to prioritize it and take the risk of having it, because otherwise, what are we doing? Then we're just ignoring the phone calls, and then
Yeah,
that
that's
person
right.
doesn't feel important. They feel left
Yeah.
out. They.
Yeah. So well said, because that's generally what I say is, listen, if I just wanted to avoid, I would do that and I wouldn't take the time and the energy to sit down and try to preserve this relationship. So
Mhm.
I'm doing that because I do want you in my life, but we just have to talk about some of the finer points.
And they're like,
Right?
geez, I have a friend
So
that's a
good.
therapist. I have to talk. Yes. It's either that or it's like calling every day and wants to process their whole life. You know what I mean? But you're a therapist. I don't want to burden you with what's going on in my life, but can I burden
Right.
you?
That's right.
Yeah, yeah. But I just have, a short story to tell, and it's like hours later. And my favorite is when this happens also, like, to change the topic on like dates, right? Because they know
Yeah.
I'm a therapist. I was married a very long time. I was married 23 years. I was very lucky. I met my husband very young, and we separated at the height of COVID. So it's like a 45-year-old
Oh,
year old woman. I re-entered into the dating scene, which is it's just
oh
absolute.
my.
Yeah. So
Yeah. Yeah.
there's like a whole set of stories that we won't get into there, right? Um, but I have had plenty of men who sit down and you're a therapist, and then that first date becomes a therapy session, and I'm like, oh,
What
this
not to
is
do, people.
what
Yeah.
not to do.
So
I'm like, can
unsexy.
you go play
Oh
like
my
mini golf?
gosh.
Yeah, I know. I know. But anyways, it goes back to your larger point that some people just haven't done the work yet, right? And I find that everybody has their own point at which they realize that, either they're in pain, or they realize that they're not living their life to their fullest, or they realize that, hold on, I am emotionally dysregulated, and where is that coming from? And it's
Mhm.
so interesting because for all the years that I was emotionally dysregulated, until I sort of learned and figured out how to work with my own mind and my own body, I didn't know that I was emotionally dysregulated. I don't know if you've had other people say this to you too, but when your baseline is so elevated and you're so anxious, or on edge, or hiding away from the world, you lose sight of the fact that you are actually emotionally dysregulated, and that you don't have to live like that. There is another side of normal.
Well, that's
Right.
your status quo. That's all, that's your
Right.
That's all
baseline.
you know.
You
That's
don't
right.
realize that actually, oh wow, my nervous system is in overdrive, like on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think you figure, like for me, I
Mhm.
figured that out in the work that we do. I learned by, by professors and my patients, my clients that were demonstrating. I'm like, wait a minute, I can relate to this. And really, I realize it. I learned so much from my clients. It's immense. But I think a lot of people learn in their relationships also. They're observing their partner and they wait a minute, there's something
Yeah.
different here.
There's something. Yeah. Yeah. Or this
Yeah.
keeps happening and I'm the common denominator.
Hmm.
Right.
Uh, you know, yes, not not everyone gets to that place where they go, I'm the problem. But ideally, the utopia would be that they would recognize that they're the one perpetrating the same patterns over and over and over.
Over
It could
and
be
over.
different partners,
Yeah.
That's right.
right? So, if you're lucky to find a secure partner, you can learn a tremendous amount from them. I learned a tremendous amount from my husband. He was just a steady rock.
Love
Nothing
that.
rocked him. Yeah. And so, I learned quite a bit. And then I learned even more after my separation when I dated a man who was dismissive avoidant.
And you're
Different
thinking,
set of
wait,
life lessons.
Like,
wait,
this
maybe
isn't
I don't want to
right.
be divorced.
That's right.
I was like, what am I doing here? I don't know.
Well, it makes
Yeah.
me think of like all the people that Denise and I do matchmaking, right? So it's like there are people that are like, please find me a securely attached person. And it's like, we can't predict that. We can't always see that when we interview potential matches.
Right.
And it also, it's like, there's room for change with attachment style. So if they're like, I only want to date a securely attached person, they're eliminating 50% of the population. It,
You
Yeah.
so
have to
And
say that
so,
again because that's
it,
a thing. It really is a thing.
yeah.
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 So if they only want to date somebody who's securely attached, they're eliminating 50% of the population. And all the other 50% has a great ability if they're motivated and they're self-reflective. and they want to grow, they can get there. They can become securely attached. So it's like, why do that? Why limit? It's already hard to meet like-minded, awesome people.
Yeah. And then how often are they self-testing and they're putting in their own bias in the test so that they can also be securely attached?
Right. When they're taking these online measures.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think because I do webinars and educational seminars on this stuff. I'm actually doing one in a couple of weeks specifically about the title is Why You're Not Getting a Second Date. And it's all about emotional regulation. And while we have said that the folks who are securely attached are generally very well emotionally regulated, you know, they're calm, they're steady, they don't have sharp changes in their mood, they're not overly aggressive, they're generally kind and thoughtful. And so I think what people are talking about is we want someone who's emotionally regulated. So that is a skill like anything else that can be learned. We also have to recognize, again, the whole spectrum thing, right? So I might be slightly leaning dismissive, but I'm mostly secure. So, you know, you have to look at there isn't one person who's going to be exactly this or exactly that. And we don't want to demonize these traits either, because there are positives there too, right? Like I started by saying, like the anxious, preoccupied person, they're very communicative, they're very generous, they're very likable, they're very generally quite honest and giving. They are beautiful people, right?
Yes.
They have trauma they haven't dealt with, right? But we don't dismiss them as bad people. I hate that word, right? Like bad. So yeah, you absolutely can work on this stuff, especially the emotional regulation piece. I have my way of trying to discern real quick who's emotionally regulated and who isn't. So like first date real quick. I actually will ask on the phone. So I've learned a few things since my debut as a single. So I have a phone. Well, listen, Denise, when I tell you I met my husband in 1997,
Oh my God.
okay, right, and we were together 23 years.
Oh my God.
The world is different today. So I was like, what are these apps? You know, and so someone had to show me and I just, there was so much I had to learn. I understood the dynamics of relationships, but dating, you need a whole degree on that. Like dating is like a whole other separate thing, right?
We should have you on again to talk about that. Would be great.
Just
Actually,
the dating.
I'm happy to.
What's it like to come out of like a time capsule? 1997 to 20, whatever, 23.
Not a time capsule.
Yeah, the story. So my best friend is a producer.
Time capsule.
My best friend's a producer in LA, and she's been begging me to write a book so she can produce a movie. It is really one of those coming of ages stories. Like, you know.
Oh my gosh.
It's quite funny.
Yeah.
It's quite funny. But anyways.
So will you come on and talk about?
I'm happy to. I would be honored. I'm having so much fun in this moment. I would be honored to do that. But I will throw like a little nugget out for your listeners who are listening now.
Yeah.
First phone call or first date. There's a couple of questions I ask right away. How's your relationship with your mom? Okay. Very revealing.
Around. Do they really?
I don't mess around. I don't mess around. No, you know what? Listen, we're going to have drinks. If it's going to turn into dinner and I'm going to sit here for 2 hours, I'm going to assess right away if you're emotionally regulated because I know that's important to me. That's my only deal breaker. If you're not emotionally regulated,
you're going to throw out their anxiety provoking questions and you're going to watch them squirm. Okay, what's the next question?
Well, most of the men that I date are divorced. Not all, but most. So how was that divorce? How did that go?
Oh my goodness.
Oh my gosh.
Right out of the gate.
I want to have you on next week.
I gotta tell you.
Oh,
what
like,
I'm looking
this is like
for.
The matchmaker's like.
You would freak out if you were working with a matchmaker because you couldn't do any of these things.
You know, I gotta tell you so I'm sitting in front of them. So their body language tells me everything. If they tense up, I go, oh, I see where this is going. Right? This is the problem, right? When you study human
Oh
behavior, you
yeah.
can see it. I have met some men who are like, listen, we outgrew each other. We co-parent nicely together and we do the best we can. And I'm like, it's pretty reasonable. Let's have dinner.
Let's have dinner. A decent answer. So it isn't so much what they're saying, it's how they're bringing it to you, right?
Yeah, what I'm looking
Okay.
for is, again, the emotional regulation. To me, when
Mhm.
someone bad mouths their ex, they're
Oh,
carrying
yeah.
anger, resentment, they're not emotionally over it, or they haven't done the work to in any way realize that they contributed to the demise of their marriage.
Agreed.
So if you're
Yeah.
really on the fringe of thinking that it's all your partner's fault, we are not emotionally at the same level. We're just not. And I don't want another client.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
good.
Okay,
Right?
what's the third question? We got it. I
Yes.
just realized, oh my gosh, we're having so much fun. We're almost,
Okay.
we're like
Yes.
definitely
Yes.
past time. But what's the third question?
I'll usually sneak this in a little bit later, not right up front, but a little bit later. I'll try to discern if they have any addictions.
Okay.
Addictions for me are a really big sign that they are using a crutch. It's a behavior, it's a coping behavior to deal with some issues that they don't want to deal with. Now, if they tell me that they like to gamble once in a while, okay. If
Right.
they tell me that, once in a while they do cocaine, no.
No.
Okay, what are you asking in such a way? Yeah.
To get that.
Yeah.
Right. So I will use myself. So I'll put myself in a vulnerable position, hoping that they will choose to be vulnerable. So I do have one addiction that has stayed with me. I smoke.
Okay.
Terrible addiction, I know. But
You don't look like
otherwise,
a smoker. You're fortunate.
thank you. But otherwise, I'm stone cold sober. Like, I smoke cigarettes, right? But I don't drink. I don't do drugs. So I'll use the opportunity and I'll say, you know what? I'm not proud of it, but I do have an addiction and I've been trying to break free, right? The vulnerability. And I do smoke
Okay.
once in a while. So I'm just wondering if that bothers you or if there's any addictions that you have that you'd like to tell me about.
First of all, anybody who has an addiction is not going to admit.
Yes,
That's
Are
not
they?
true.
How many
do
of
it
They
those
do
so.
right
men?
away.
How many of them have admitted that they are a drug addict or an alcoholic?
Uh, Most of them. So some of them will
What?
say,
Really?
yes, some of them will say, I used to have a problem with alcohol, but now I'm in AA. And I'll be like,
Okay.
great,
I could see
right?
that. I could see that.
So
Yeah.
that for sure. But I'm
Yeah,
talking an
for sure.
active addiction.
Some
But
people have said
it
they,
sounds like it doesn't matter if it's active or not for you.
it does. It matters how it's being used. So the substance matters because I think
Okay.
some substances are more destructive than others,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
So the substance matters. I have hard lines around like hard drugs. Those are my hard
Those
lines.
are your, yeah.
Yeah. Uh, Surprisingly, I have found, and this is interesting, I have found that if I ask a man deadpan, straight question, they will answer. I have
How
found
will
that.
will they say it and then qualify it with something?
Oh, they'll usually rationalize the behavior
Yes.
100%.
Okay. Yeah.
Of
Yeah.
course.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, just like I did, right? I was like, I'm a
So
little embarrassed. I've been trying to quit. Yeah.
yeah, so I'm currently working on recovery. I'm working on I'm working with a sponsor, trying to that kind of thing. Like I'm in the process.
I'm in the process. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And that's
Oh,
okay.
yeah.
So,
If it's true, that's it.
well, so uh that whether I can believe what this individual says is to be discerned later because trust is something that's earned over a period of time. You're
Of
never
course.
going to be able to identify whether this person is being truthful on your first meeting. So you ask the question, you get the answer, and you store it away.
Mhm.
Then you see what comes next, right?
Eyes
And
wide
so
open.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. And I remember my ex-boyfriend told me on our first lunch date, I'm a recovering alcoholic. And I was like, okay, I've been sober this many years. And I was like, okay. And when we traveled together, I would always go up to, the little pool bar, like and I would get myself a drink and him like a virgin drink. And I would sip both to make sure that there was no alcohol in his. And this became part of our relationship dynamic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, if you're not going to be honest and if you're not going to be honest and forthcoming with me, then there's nothing to build towards.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a straight shooter, which really, I think, I hear a lot of men saying, I love when people are straight with me, like just, straight up honest, until they hear something they don't like.
They don't like until they get the straight shot from you.
So you're too honest. Like, well, that's the risk. I know.
You
Anyways,
can't
I'm
have
happy.
one without the other. You know what I'm saying? At some
That's right.
point, the straight shooting is going to be in your direction.
In your direction. That's it.
Yeah,
You're going
but
to be in the
what's
line
so
of fire.
interesting, and Dr. Frankie, I don't know if you'll pick this up too, just to round back to, attachment styles. The reason that honesty and transparency is so critically important for me is because of the chaos that I grew up with in childhood.
Sure.
So,
Absolutely.
so
I can
it's
No
relate to that.
surprises.
extremely
You can't
difficult for
take
me
it.
to trust, right?
That's
You get
right.
it, Denise.
Yeah.
So it's really hard for me to trust someone. So I have a very specific process. I ask a lot of questions, I store the information, and then I wait and I see.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's
And
it.
just the last thought, and then I want you to tell everybody how they can find you. Is I cannot tolerate dysregulated people for very close to me, because it just starts to send my nervous system through the roof. So yeah, anyway, so I just to say that like you really need to, it's important if you grew up around a lot of just a lot of trauma, basically, that you got to be committed to your own health to figure out how, we owe it to ourselves to create an environment for ourselves that is nurturing and loving and supportive, especially if we grew up with chaos. Like, I don't have any time for that shit at this point in my life. I'm like, I already paid my dues.
Amen.
For a decade and a half. No, almost 2 decades.
Seriously.
I'm done with that. Thank you. Now I'd like to
Yeah.
choose to, work on myself and be around people that actually prioritize their own mental health as well. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, but it's so true. And sometimes I have clients coming to me saying, I want to fix my partner. And I go, well, let's look at the, motivation here. First, let's look at you, right? And then we can talk about the dynamic, but there's no fixing someone else.
Right.
The golden ticket here is that once you realize that living in a calm state outside of that, hyperactive, like when you're in fight or flight mode, living in a calm state feels so good.
Yeah.
Once you're able to attain the peace, you protect it fiercely.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
That's
I'm not
so
giving this
true.
up.
I'm not. That's
We
right. I'm not
thrive
going
in
back
that
down that
environment.
rabbit hole. That's right.
Otherwise, we're just surviving, and like you're throwing your body in these high spikes and drops and spikes, and I mean,
The stress is too
And
much.
you know what it feels like, right? Because you lived half your life like that. I don't want to go back to that.
no, me neither.
Right.
Good. And
Yeah.
hopefully
Yeah.
for folks who are listening and relating, be committed to your health and start, right? Like, make an appointment with Bev and, work, get the books and do the work, because it's so worthwhile. So worthwhile. So how can folks find you, Bev?
That's so great. Thank you. It was such a great conversation. So I am the founder of Securely Loved. The website is securelyloved.com. We are also on Instagram and TikTok, securely_loved. We do try our best to put out snippets of information that we think our audience will find useful. Securely Loved is a collective, actually, of practitioners who are working in relationship and attachment trauma. So it's not just me. I do have some other practitioners that are fantastic. And we do offer like a 20-minute free sign up if you want to talk to us about something, see if we're aligned in terms of the work that you want to do. All of that is on our website. We are also offering, in a couple of weeks, we're starting up group workshop sessions. I know a lot of people like to learn in a peer supported group. So we're giving that a try with one of Securely Love's practitioners, Dr. Emily Henderson. She's fabulous. So if people just want to get a sense of the attachment 101, where do I sit? What are some of the things? It's like an intro course, I would say. That might be a really great option for you too. Or if you just want to come to the website, there's lots of information there to share. I'm just really grateful that people are interested in this topic, and that people want to learn because, um, I mean, I'm a little biased, but I think it's incredibly important.
Yes, I think we both agree with you.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bev.
Yeah. And thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Have a beautiful week. Kisses, hugs. Take care, everyone. Bye.